Social Studies, Chapter 8, Lesson 2, that talks about the climate of the Southwest. And just like the picture that they show at the top of page 262, the climate in the Southwest varies quite a bit depending on where in the Southwest you are. So if you look at the picture at the top there, you can see the big contrast, the big difference between those greener areas that look like they've gotten a lot of moisture versus these dry brown areas that are right next to them. Well, in many parts of the Southwest, the only way to end up with green areas like that is to constantly be watering those fields, which is why there are fewer crops grown there, and the agriculture aspect is a lot more livestock because that doesn't take quite as much water. They don't have to constantly be watering fields like that to keep them green. So on page 262, we'll go ahead and pause here and read about the range of climates, and then we'll talk about it. So on this page, it said, just like the landforms vary as you go across the Southwest, even though there's only 4 states, it's a pretty big area of land because Texas is so large. The climate also varies a lot. You could be over in Arizona and be in the desert, and within the same region, it says just about 1,000 miles away on the coast of Texas, it's still hot because it's in the southern part of the United States, but it's a lot more moisture, humidity because it's on the ocean there, and they get a lot more precipitation, a lot more rain. So depending on where you're at in the region, you're going to have a different climate. It says Arizona and New Mexico in the south, they have an arid, which is very dry because they're in that deserty area. But even within their own states, in the northern part of Arizona and New Mexico, it's only semi-dry. They get more moisture than the southern part, and so within their own state, they have a pretty different climate as well. And then Texas being so big, depending on what part of Texas you're in, that has different climates too. The western half that's closer to New Mexico tends to be drier, but as you go east, you get closer and closer to, same thing in the Midwest, that Central Plains area that gets more moisture, and so the climate changes. So number 1 at the bottom here says write a conclusion about how the climate in the Southwest might affect people. So let's see, we can make a note there. So the climate, especially for people who live there, it would affect crops that are grown or activities that you do. Okay, if we go on to the next page, it talks about Tornado Alley, which we've mentioned before. Go ahead and pause and read about it, and then we'll talk. So obviously, we know in Minnesota what tornadoes are. They happen in the Midwest also. And they talk about this area that they have named Tornado Alley because of the fact that that's the region in the United States where most tornadoes occur. And if you actually look at the map, that purple area is Tornado Alley. Most of it is south of us, but the bottom part of Minnesota, probably including Fairmont, gets in on the very edge of that Tornado Alley. And so what we have to have for a tornado to form is that hot, humid air meeting the cooler air coming in with a thunderstorm, and those air masses meeting and mixing to form those dangerous storms that can cause tornadoes at times. And so it says, obviously, tornadoes can be deadly. If they ripped through a town, they would destroy houses. They could, hurt people as well and cause lots and lots of damage. So let's look at number 2 here. It says circle the air masses that can cause tornadoes. Then write the names of the states in the Southwest that are part of Tornado Alley. Since we're just talking about the Southwest region, we're only focusing on those ones, even though it includes states from the Midwest also. So, the air masses that have to meet for these tornadoes to form, I don't have a pen I can use on this one, but I should have all 3 of those arrows on the map circled. When you have the warm, dry air, the warm, moist air, and the cold, dry air meeting, that makes a perfect conditions for a tornado to happen. And that's why they happen down in the Oklahoma, Kansas, northern Texas area so often, because they're near many of those different types of air masses. And so then the states from the Southwest that land in part of this tornado alley are obviously Texas and Oklahoma. And if you look closely, the edge of New Mexico gets in on that as well. So you should have all 3 there. If you go ahead and go on to the next page, it talks about the climate and vegetation. So I'm going to go ahead and pause and read that. So what it says on this page is since there's different climates in different parts of this region, there's obviously going to be different vegetation or different plants that grow there. And so, in Arizona you've got the desert, and so you're going to have plants that don't require as much water, like cactus and things like that. But as you go further east, you've got some forest areas where there's trees, national grasslands. Let's see. And then obviously in Texas and Oklahoma, you've got some crops that are grown too. You've got a picture of a desert owl sitting in a cactus there on this page, and then the picture on the bottom, it says in between the eastern and western parts of the region, there's open plains and partly wooded areas like the cross timbers in Texas. So you don't see many trees in Arizona, but over in this region you do. Go ahead and go to the next page, pause and read. So here it talks about some of the animals that you can find in the Southwest. Again, depending on where you're at, the animals are going to be different because different types of animals are adapted to living in different climates. And so it says, over in the desert, you would see lizards, rattlesnakes, Gila monsters, things like that have adapted to life in the desert. Versus over in the grasslands, further into Texas and Oklahoma, you would see deer, armadillos, bald eagles, bison, coyotes, some animals that you find in the Midwest as well. And then Padre Island, it says, which is part of Texas, that's a big part of a bird's migration path. And so at different times in the year, you see all kinds of different birds that either live there or are passing through on their migrations. And also sea turtles that come to lay eggs on the beach. So if we've got number 3 here, it says right where each animal can be found. So for the American bison, it mentioned the grassland of Oklahoma. For the egret, it mentioned Padre Island in Texas. And for the Gila monster, the Sonoran Desert of Arizona. So there's a picture of an egret there that you might see on Padre Island. On to the next page, talks about the mountainous area that's in this region. So go ahead and pause and read this page. So this talks about the varying climate and landforms that you can find even within one state. So down in southern Arizona, like say in the Phoenix area, which is in the middle of the desert, or Tucson, it's hot and dry. But you don't have to go very far to end up in a completely different climate, because there is a mountainous area in northern Arizona also. And so it says, you know, if you could go from Phoenix to Flagstaff, Arizona, it's just 150 miles away, and it could be 30 degrees cooler within that same state because of the elevation. It gets higher and higher up into the mountains. Flagstaff is a really mountainous area. And if you've ever driven through that area, when we drove through there a couple of summers ago, I remember thinking to myself, it looks so much like the Black Hills area if you've ever driven through there. You know, there's pine trees all over the place. It's very hilly, and the temperature is much different than the southern part of its own state, and that has to do with its elevation above sea level. And so, you know, within this same state, we've got these drastic differences, and it shows a picture of that mountainous area right there. So number 4 on this page says write C on the area that appears to be the coldest, even within this picture. Well, to me, the part with snow looks the coldest, so I would put my C right up there on top of that mountain area. And finally, we've got this last page. Go ahead and pause and read this paragraph here. On this page, it talks about activities that people would do just for recreation or for fun, and how they would be different depending on where in the region you are. Obviously, if you're in the desert, your activities are going to be different than if you were over on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. And so, you know, or if you were up in the mountains, you might be able to go skiing, versus if you were in the desert, you couldn't do that. So your elevation and your area where you are depends on, or it changes the activities that you might do in that area. So for your assignment here, I'll have you do number 5 and 6 on your own on this page. Number 5 says write a summary of how the climate of the Southwest changes as you travel from west to east. So starting over in Arizona in the west, traveling east to the coast of Texas, how would the climate change as you drove across there? And then number 6, sometimes an animal represents a culture. A bald eagle is a national bird of the United States. Think about an eagle flying in the sky over the Southwest. Write about how an eagle might represent American culture. In other words, why do you think they picked the bald eagle as our national bird? What traits or what characteristics did the American people admire about this bird that made them pick it as our national bird? What do you think? So you can go ahead and get started there.